Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, where you can get early access to reviews and short film block reviews like I've done for the Atlanta Film Festival and Fantasia Fest recently. That's at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. You can also subscribe to the podcast at various podcast platforms like Google and Apple and Spotify and soon to be Amazon. Joining me today is a filmmaker that I met for the first time at the Women in Horror Film Festival back in February when her film Black Lake made its world premiere, and it is going to be playing at the Salem Horror Festival coming up in October, and I thought this would be a good time to revisit the film and talk to her, and I'm pleased to be joined today by filmmaker KXI. Thank you very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, Brian. Thank you for having me.
We'll go ahead and start off with some general questions before we get into Black Lake, because there is a lot to talk about Black Lake when it comes to Black Lake. What inspired you to get into movie making?
I've been a terror all my life, Brian. I think since I was about 6 or 7, I just loved scaring people. I love writing horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
I read The Exorcist when I was 10. So when people were reading Goosebumps, I was there reading The Exorcist and reading Jaws. So yeah, I had a bit of an early start. And my dad always loved horror movies. We didn't necessarily watch them together, but I don't know. I just always found them exciting, and I loved writing horror stories. I always thought, actually, that I would grow up and just write horror fiction. So when I went to university, that's what I planned to do, and the universe had other plans.
What are some of the filmmakers, and what are some of the films that inspired you to pursue filmmaking?
Ooh, so Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2. I have so much love for that movie, especially like when you hear about how they made the film, and there's just so much love there. And it was just films like that got me thinking, I really want to do this. I actually thought when I started making movies that's what I was going to be making. Gore fests, blood seeping out of floorboards, dripping from dripping out of windows and things. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. That didn't happen either. So, I grew up watching, films like The Exorcist, Alien. I love the classics, Rosemary's Baby, The Shining. And in my teenage years, I watched a lot of world cinema. So Ring, The Grudge, the Russian movie Night Watch and Day Watch, and I watched films from all over the world. I love French cinema. Being South Asian, I grew up with Bollywood films. So yes. I just love films from all over. So it's not just horror, a lot of art house, experimental cinema, all sorts.
Who are some of the filmmakers that you would say have inspired you the most?
Tarsem Singh. So Tarsem Singh directed The Cell, The Fall, and most recently Lady Gaga's new music video 911, which was quite a gift this week. So Tarsem Singh, definitely. I have a lot of love for Hitchcock and Kubrick. And I think when it came to specifically Black Lake, Brian Fuller's Hannibal TV series was a big visual treat for me. And I'm in love with the cinema of Nicholas Winding Refn, so The Neon Demon, Drive. Yes.
Well, let's go ahead and get started on Black Lake. And I've now seen the film 3 times. I watched it at Women in Horror Film Festival. I screened it shortly afterwards, and then I watched it earlier this week in preparation for this interview. I one of the things that really hit me even more this time watching it is how much of it is purely cinematic and visual storytelling. There's very little dialogue in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
How much dialogue would you say is in this movie? Have you timed it? Like how much?
Gosh, with a runtime of about 97, 98 minutes, I can't imagine there's more than 10 minutes of dialogue.
Yeah, and that was the thing that really struck me even more this time around is that like the first time I watched it, like it felt very when we were watching it in the theater, it felt very like a very patient, a very methodical story to watch unfold. I mean, I kind of had that same experience watching it again, like the week afterwards. This time, the thing that struck me so much is that the movie moves remarkably. It's a remarkably confident film from a storytelling standpoint, and it moves very quickly for a movie that has maybe if maybe 10 minutes of dialogue in the movie. It doesn't really let up for a minute, and you get all the information you need, and that's one of the things that's so striking. First of all, where did the idea for the movie come from?
Wow. So the idea, when I finished filming my first feature film, Maya, which was a few years ago, and I'm revisiting it, so it's not available just yet. Maya was about jinn possession, and a lot of people said, "Kay, can you make something that's more visceral?" And growing up with a Pakistani background, so I was born and raised in London, but my parents come from Pakistan. Every summer we'd go there and I'd hear stories about jinn possession and the Jurel, which is the witch, the South Asian witch. It's something people still believe in today. It's a big deal. So I thought about making a movie about a Jurel. It's been done maybe a couple of times in Bollywood cinema, but she was always depicted as like a seductress, almost like a siren type figure. And the more I read about it, I was like, wait a minute, she's not a monster. This is a product of violence against women. So the more I looked into it, the idea became more of an origin story of the Jurel. And around this time, the Jyoti Singh case in Delhi was happening. And that was a big deal. It really affected me because this was a young woman who was gang raped on a bus, and she was coming home from watching a movie. So the idea of, and as a lover of film and cinema, just that really got to me. And it was the idea of cycles of violence. You know, horrible things are done to people, and the idea that they then come back to do horrible things to other people. And, you know, we can often see this in kind of violent relationships or abusive relationships we have, and not just romantic relationships, but any type, you know, family relationships. So I really wanted to make a film that wasn't specifically, I did not want to do a rape revenge film.
Right.
I wanted to deal with the aftermath of that. How do you break the cycle of violence? It comes from a personal place as well, and it's the idea of, you know, being in a place where you don't meet violence with violence. How do you deal with that? What do you do? And at what point do you say, this hurts too much, stop, I've got to get out of here?
And I think the fact that she's the main character's an artist in it, I think is one of the best ideas in one of the strongest ideas in the movie, because of the fact that basically art is very cathartic. It can be very cathartic to people. And I mean, I speak that from experiences myself as a composer. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you create something out of a tragedy, it takes on a different meaning, and it can help you move through those emotions. And the thing that's so interesting about this is that you have this this object. The main character gets Arya gets a scarf from her aunt, and it basically, it's a very nice gift, but as the movie goes on, you realize that there's much more going on as far as this scarf. You understand that there's more of, and the idea, and also the idea that the trauma lingers on objects and on individuals. I mean, it's such a very potent idea that is handled so subtly. I mean, it's subtle, but it's not subtle in the film. But the fact that we don't have to see the violence, the fact that you didn't have to make a typical rape revenge movie in order to get this point across, is what makes it so strong.
Thank you. I was actually, because I've been speaking to a few people, I did mention that there were a few violent scenes that did get shot, and I cut them. I couldn't stomach it, especially because when you read the graphic details of the Jyoti Singh case, it's upsetting enough. Yeah. And when kind of link the two things together, you think you just don't need to show it. It's not necessary.
Yeah, and again, the fact that it's all of it is basically implied, and then you see the way that you see the aftermath that the aunt goes through. You see some of the things that happens to Arya throughout the film. You play Arya in the film. What was one of the challenges for you as a director, also being really one of the only actors in the movie and basically having to carry the movie?
Oh gosh, it was tough, and it was never the original idea. So, I originally planned to film the whole thing in Pakistan. That fell through. Came back and got some money together and filmed in Scotland. And again, it didn't go to plan. I ended up just getting rid of the actors and just changing up the crew. And I was in a really dark place after that time, and I thought, this is such an important story for me. It was cathartic for me as well, and I was like, I've got to do this. And I remember telling CK, the co-producer, and the other cast and crew, I said, look, we're going to continue, but what we're going to do is start over, and I will be Arya. And everybody just said, Kay, you should have been Arya from the start. So, because I was just, I like being behind the camera. And, being able to kind of give up that position and say to CK, you're the only one, please, I trust you. She was a bit hesitant, but, she did a great job. It was just about having people on board that I could trust. So what we would do is we would basically shoot the scenes and I'd review them, lock them down before we moved on to the next scene. It was very difficult, especially the painting scenes, because I really had to just lose control. I had to just let go. And I said to the crew, I said, it's going to be very difficult for me to navigate between acting and directing and directing the crew. So I said, so it was, that was pretty tough. But everybody did a great job. In the painting scenes, we only ever had 3 people on set at once. So it was very challenging. But for me personally, it was a very transformative experience. It was very challenging, and I did things I never thought I would. That lake was pretty damn cold. Yes, and I don't fare well with bugs, so that was a thing too.
When you were outlining when you were outlining the story, was it a conscious decision when you were writing the screenplay to have as little dialogue as possible?
Absolutely, Brian. The idea is Arya is house sitting for an elderly lady in this secluded property in Scotland. She has no one to talk to, and the idea that you're in this place, you want to make art, you're not going to be on the phone all the time. So she has very limited dialogue with her aunt. She's not going to walk around the house talking to herself. Even if she did, that would be fine.
Yeah.
So that was it. And I get sometimes I get fed up with unnecessary dialogue in films, not just horror films, just any films. And I think so much can be explained through the elements, for instance, and the surroundings. So I think the silence in that respect, or the lack of dialogue, because there's so much music, I think it helps. It creates a sense of unease. You almost, at points, you might even crave to hear a voice just to be like, what's happening? Where am I? You want to feel grounded in a voice.
Yeah, one of the things I think this partially has to do with my background as somebody who's always been interested in film music and film sound is one of the things I've always appreciated in films is not only a good sound mix and a strong use of soundtrack, which this film certainly has, but the the ability of a filmmaker to recognize when not having sound is perfectly all right. And I agree. I mean, there's no real need for any more dialogue behind what we get in the movie. Everything, that's basically the only sense of exposition as far as moving the ideas of the movie of the film forward, what the scarf represents, how it plays into everything. And that's really all you need because I mean, you're not necessarily going to just sit around the house alone just talking to yourself or just talking to other people. And so I think the idea that there is, and we'll get into the soundtrack because I absolutely love the soundtrack, as you know. The fact that there's so many moments of silence in the movie, and I'm still like perked up in my seat, following things. It's a really strong sign of confident and a strong storytelling voice that you understand the fact that it's like you don't need sound going on all the time. It doesn't have to be this wall of sound.
Thank you.
So one of my favorite things about the movie, which from us being Facebook friends and me every few weeks, basically putting a track up on my Facebook page, is the soundtrack by Burning Tapes. I absolutely love this.
Thank you.
It remains my favorite soundtrack of the year. And how did you come across them to do the soundtrack, and what were some of your notes to them when it came to making the soundtrack?
Sure. So it was, I think I just come back from filming in Pakistan, and I put some bits up on Instagram, and Burning Tapes is Darren Page, and Darren and Gary, they run Burning Witches Records. So one of them liked my Instagram posts, and I like to see who's liking my things, just to see what they're doing. And I listened to their music. I found out they did music. I listened to music, specifically Darren's music, and I loved it. His first album, which he released through Burning Witches Records, and I got in touch and I said, would you be interested in scoring my feature? And he was so excited. We had a lot of films in common, like Suspiria, Dario Argento's Suspiria, and many other things. So we met up, talked about it, got contracts in place, everything. And it was great. I basically had some tracks in place already in the film to give an idea of what kind of sounds, not necessarily what kind of sounds, what kind of feelings I was after. So, for example, the opening track, I'd originally had Virtual Mima from Perfect Blue in place. And I said to Darren, this is the kind of feeling I want. So I had bits, and so he knew which scenes I wanted music for. And he would compose bits, send things back to me. And what I would do is I would close my eyes and I would just listen to it in the dark. And if I felt it, like in my body, on my body. So like if my hairs were standing on end, I would say, yes, let's do this. And then, if something needed tweaking, I'd be like, oh, more worms or something like that. And he would know exactly what I'd meant. And, he did a great job. It was a really good collaboration, and I really enjoyed it. So, that was absolutely fantastic. And then having the score available on vinyl and, having something tangible that people could have in their homes, that was great. And as well as that, there's a lot of licensed music in the film as well. So it was just great to collaborate with so many artists worldwide.
Yeah. Were there any particular films that you had in mind when you were making Black Lake?
In terms of, do you mean inspiration?
Yeah.
Right?
Inspiration, just other films that sort of, deal with similar themes and such.
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that. I think Black Lake is it's its own kind of species.
Yeah.
So more than that, what I wanted to do in Black Lake, rather than drawing from things, I wanted to show gratitude for things, if that makes sense. So, for example, the Fantastic Planet scene is a kind of thank you to Tarsem Singh for using it in the cell, and amongst other things. I really, what I really enjoyed was the cinematography in the Neon Demon and Brian Fuller's Hannibal TV series, and I really wanted to have that kind of feel and look, to that attention to detail. That was mainly it. Yeah.
The reason I ask is because you mentioned Perfect Blue, which is another terrific film about. It's very much a psychological thriller centered around the main character who's basically being stalked and is really coming apart emotionally speaking, and that's just one of the best thrillers I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
That movie is amazing, and I couldn't help but think of, just in thinking about the movie and rewatching it, I couldn't help but think of Darren Aronofsky's Mother as well, which I adored. I
love Mother.
I thought Mother was fantastic.
I don't think CK Mother, when it came out, because we've been like intensely filming Black Lake, when she saw Mother, she literally looked at me and she said, "This is what life with you is like." And I said, "Okay." So I don't know if she enjoyed it, so.
Right. No, I mean, and look, I completely get it if people aren't into that movie, because it's a big and very intense movie to get into. And I can certainly see that being the case with this one, but I mean, I do think there's a lot of accessibility to this because of the fact that the storytelling is just so sure-handed. Like you know the story that you're telling, you tell it in a way that isn't relying on just sort of needless plot devices or anything like that, and it's just this simple this simple journey that we're going on with Arya throughout this film, and it's done in a very direct and very very visceral way that you don't really,
love that one.
Yeah, that you don't need any other complicated plot devices or anything like that to get across.
I'm actually really glad you brought up Perfect Blue, because there's a little homage to Perfect Blue in Black Lake. Yes, so.
Do you know when the film is playing at the Salem Horror Fest?
It will be the second weekend, so from the 9th, and that's all I know. That's all I know.
Okay. So is it a virtual fest, or are they going to have live theatrical screenings as well?
So it's a virtual fest, and what you can do is purchase a weekend pass for the first weekend or the second weekend, or both, and there's like an all season pass. And what I think with the all access pass, is that you would be able to engage with the content. So they've got podcasts, panels, lectures, films. You can engage with the materials for a good 12 months. Although I don't think that applies. I don't think that applies to the feature films. I think they're available perhaps the month of October. But yeah, they've got a phenomenal lineup, and it's just an absolute honor to be part of it.
Yeah. When does the festival start? Isn't it it's the second, I think, isn't it, of next month?
Yes, it's next weekend. Yeah.
Okay.
Next weekend.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you again.
It was all mine, Brian. Thank you.
I'd like to thank KXI for joining me today. Her film Black Lake is going to be playing at the Salem Horror Fest, and it's going to be the second weekend, as she talked about. I highly recommend checking it out. It's currently still the best movie I've seen in 2020, and each viewing that I've had of the movie just reinforces that more and more. So I hope you check that out. Thank you very much for joining me on the Sonic Cinema podcast. I will have more on the Atlanta Film Festival, as well as hopefully some discussion of some year 2000 horror movies for you. I still need to do that, but that's it for this time for the Sonic Cinema podcast. Thank you very much for joining me, and continue to check us out at www.sonic-cinema.com.